who is this person? And what does he or she believe? And where does that come from? And what's it based on? And can we rely on what they're saying matches up with what they believe and what they've done and in their personal life and their professional life? And are they who they say they are? And so I want to just spend a little time introducing myself to you. I know my name is not yet a household name across the country, but we're making good progress. It's not the first time that I've encountered this hurdle in my public life before. When I was first running for governor in Minnesota back in 2001, I finished up my time as majority leader of the Minnesota House, and I came home to my wonderful wife, Mary. By the way, I hope you have a chance to meet her sometime. We met at the University of Minnesota. We've been married 23 years. We have these wonderful daughters, and I love them very much. But the problem is, one of them drives, and they both like boys. And so we both can't leave the state very often at the same time. So my older daughter had one of her friends over from her school, a young man, and I said to this gathering of supporters, if you want to see the reason why Mary can't travel with me all the time, he's sitting right here in the front row. But I hope you have a chance to meet her. We met in school. She believes what we believe. She is not somebody who's reluctant to this process. She's enthusiastic. She's got a tremendous heart. And she's joyful and optimistic, and I'd love to have you meet her. I think you'd like it. But anyhow, I came home one day in 2001 after being majority leader, and I said, honey, you know, I've been in the legislature now and majority leader, and Governor Ventura was thinking about running again, and maybe I shouldn't even just think about this governor's race. Let's just hang it up and move on. And she came across the room, and she said, you can't quit. You got to get in there. You have to fight. You have to fight for our values. If you don't run, there's nobody else. Nobody else can win. And so I got in the race, and against long odds, won the race. And about a month into my governorship, we were busy. I had State of the State, and of course a big budget deficit, State of the Union, all of that stuff. And my schedule got a little out of control, and Mary was holding me account for the schedule properly. And I came home, and she said, you know, you got to be home. And she was giving me the what for, and I think deservedly so. But at one point in the conversation, I said, honey, don't you remember? I mean, you're the one who told me to get in the race. You told me to take this big hill. And she said, yeah, but I didn't think you'd win. I just wanted you to get on with your life. But I want you to meet her, and the familiarity with the exercise and the task at hand is ours, and it's a great labor of love, and we enjoy being out on the campaign trail. I want to share the thoughts with you tonight, though, from the perspective of our nation. And our nation is in great trouble, as you know. This is the greatest nation the world has ever known. And we're a great nation primarily because we're the freest nation the world has ever known. And we're having a great debate across the country now about the size of government in people's lives and the role of government as it relates to people's lives. And people sometimes think, well, our freedom is only eroded or challenged when there's some external force that might come and cause us a security concern, and that's for sure something we need to be very diligent about and vigilant about, but more importantly, or just more frequently, each day as government at the local level or the state level, at the federal level, pushes into an area that was previously reserved for families or for neighborhoods or for community or for charity or for places of worship or for the private sector or for philanthropy, and they come in and say, you know, we'll do that now, or we'll make what you were doing before harder, more expensive, more difficult, slower. What they do is not only expand government, they not only grow budgets, but they do something else that should be equally troubling to all of us in this room. They nudge across the non-governmental energy, really the American spirit, and they tell us in our American spirit of individual responsibility of families, neighborhoods, community, faith, they say, no thank you. And they nudge us aside. And they corrode the American spirit. So we need to be talking as a party about the numbers and the money, and I will in just a minute. But we also need to start with the value statement that this is the greatest nation the world's ever known because we're free. And if that freedom unleashes a human spirit, that's so important. And it can be easily stifled or easily suffocated by a government that is too expensive, too burdensome, too discouraging, and too heavy on its citizens. And that's what's happening. And you see it, I see it, and we need to fight back. So we need to restore America's promise. And the way to do that is to restore the values and the common sense that this nation was built upon. Now, we can't restore America's promise with a president who has broken his promise to the American people. I won't go through the whole list, but think back with me, if you will, to the campaign of 2008. You had then candidate Obama look the American people in the eye and say, you know, I won't spend another dime in the federal budget that isn't fully paid for. Remember that statement? Yeah. President Obama didn't keep the promise, did he? No, he didn't. What about when he stood in Iowa and he said, you know, we have a health care crisis in the United States of America, and indeed we do. Our health care system is broken. But he said in Iowa, on the night of the Iowa caucuses, we're going to fix the health care system, and we're going to do it with Republicans together. We're going to focus on cost containment. And he said in the campaign he was opposed to the individual mandate. So I ask you tonight, did President Obama break his promise there too? And then he said during the campaign he wanted to secure the borders for our nation, to make our nation more secure. Did President Obama break that promise? And then he said, amongst other things, you know, I'm not going to raise taxes on anyone who makes over $250,000, not a penny, not one time. And then, of course, they did a number of things, including saying the federal government's going to order you to buy health insurance the way they tell you, under the terms and conditions that they mandate, and if you don't, you'll pay a tax. And they passed that law. Do you think President Obama kept his promise there? We can't restore America's promise with a president who's broken his promise, time and time again. What we need to do, though, is get back to those values and traditions and principles that made this nation great. The way forward is not easy, but it's not complex. The people who best outlined and first outlined America's promise were our founding fathers. And they embedded it into the glorious documents of this nation. And they gave us a roadmap, and it starts with this important principle. We need to be a nation that turns toward God, not away from God. And in those documents, they made this phrase, and put this phrase right up front. We the people. They didn't say we the judges. They didn't say we the bureaucrats. They didn't say we the county clerks. No offense to any county clerks. But they also said we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. We're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. So this gift of liberty, this grant of freedom, doesn't come from Washington, D.C. doesn't come from St. Paul, Minnesota, the governor's office, or the legislature. It comes from our Creator. We were made free by God, and the Constitution was designed to keep us free. So we have a grand document, and the document does not protect government from us. It's supposed to protect us from the government. Amen. And we need to remind the government that when we're expressing our views, we tell them what to do. They don't tell us what to do. The founders of the other principles in this country are also important. And here's one that I know is complex to maybe some of the Democrats who will be watching on the tracker video and the like. But I'll say it slowly because they can follow along even as Democrats. Are you ready? We can't spend more than we take in. You can't do it in your family life, and we can't let the government do it anymore. Yeah. We have a federal government that is out of control. They've been debating in Washington, D.C. about whether they should reduce this year's spending by somewhere between $30 and $40 billion. Now, you might think, gosh, that sounds like a lot of money, $30 to $40 billion. Well, here's the clunker. They spent in deficit this year $1.5 trillion. So they're having a debate about whether they should spend, 3.5 trillion or 3.6 trillion or something in between. It doesn't even make up any difference in the pie chart to speak of. And then the Congressional Budget Office comes out and says, excuse me, members of Congress, The $38 billion that the president came out and bragged about a few nights ago, and how he then led the charge. Remember that? He gives his press conference. Of course, he gets dragged, kicking and screaming to the deal. But then, of course, it was his idea and his version of events. But the Congressional Budget Office, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, comes out today and says, that's not going to cut $38 billion out of the budget this year. You know what the number was? $362 million. So we got a lot of work to do. You can't spend $3.7 trillion and take in $2.2 trillion. If you look at a pie chart of federal spending in this nation, and you look at the red part, the red being the non-discretionary spending, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, interest on the national debt, that red part is over the halfway line on the pie chart, and it's growing at the rate that it's going to be over the three-quarters line in about 15 years or less. And most of the rest is defense. So we need to, as leaders, look the American people in the eye and tell them the truth. And not scare them, but offer constructive, positive, specific solutions to their problems. I applaud our members in Congress who are trying to do just that. But let me address one by way of example. The Social Security issue. People say, don't touch it. You know, it's too hot. We have to. We have to be bold and courageous. We have to tell the truth, and we have to put our solutions on the table, and then we have to compete in the arena of ideas. So for Social Security, we have to say, if you're coming in new to the program, we're going to have to raise the retirement age gradually over time to reflect increasing life expectancies. It won't affect anybody who's in the program now, but for newcomers to the program, we simply have to do that. It's a reasonable thing. I think we can get most of the country to agree on that. I think we're going to have to look at the Social Security program and say, as it relates to the cost of living adjustment, not the whole program, if you're wealthy, you're not going to get as big of a cost of living adjustment in the future than if you're middle income or you're poor. Now, these are not optimal choices, but we have to fix the program. There's no easy way out. But we have to campaign like we're going to govern and govern like we campaign. We have to tell the American people the truth and not be afraid to put our ideas out on the table and defend them and advance the cause. I believe in the American people. I believe they're reasonable. I believe they know they have a problem. We have a problem. And I believe they'll embrace fair and reasonable solutions. The next one is... spending issue, if we don't fix it, it'll take down the country. There are many other examples, but just because we followed Greece into democracy doesn't mean we follow Greece into bankruptcy. Next one is people spend money differently if some of it's their money. So any system where people don't know the price, don't know the quality, and the provider gets to provide based on seniority or volume, and the myth is created that the bill magically goes somewhere else, that's a system that's doomed to fail. Unfortunately, that's most of government. And so as we think about government reform, if you've got time to stay up all night and watch cable TV, please do. It's great. If you've got time to go to seminars and read white papers, there's wonderful information to be had there. I encourage that. But if you need just the Reader's Digest version of the shortcut to most of what you need to know about government reform, just do this. Go to 2 weddings. Go to one wedding where there's an open bar. Go to another wedding where there's a cash bar. You'll see 2 very different sets of behaviors. I said this in New York recently, and some Wall Streeter in the back of the room yelled out, "Who even has a cash bar anymore?" And I thought that question reflected all you needed to know about what's going on in Wall Street. So we have to have people in charge of their decisions with good information about price and quality, give them financial incentives to make wise decisions, and then have the providers be incented to provide other than on seniority or just volume. In other words, quality and performance. And have that in financial alignment with each other. So what does that look like in the real world? Well, we said to our state employees in Minnesota, look, you can go anywhere you want for your health care. But if you go somewhere really expensive with bad results, you'll pay more. And if you go somewhere that's more efficient with better results, you'll pay less. Guess what happened? 80% of them migrated to higher quality, more efficient healthcare providers, and the premium increases during the 8 years or so of the program when I was governor, dramatically below market. And then one last thing. There's a lot of concern, as there should be, about America's role in the world and how we project our interests and our security concerns both here and abroad. This lesson I think you have learned in life, whether it be in sports or in business, or perhaps you've learned it in politics or some other walk of life. Probably most of you have not learned it in a bar room. I hope not, it didn't come there. But it's always true, though. When you're dealing with bullies and you're dealing with thugs, they understand only one thing. They understand strength. If you show them weakness, if you show them uncertainty, if you show them timidity or equivocation, they exploit it. And so when America projects its interests around the world and defines our national security interests, we need to do so with certainty, steadiness, strength, and conviction on our behalf and on behalf of our allies. We have a president now who seems very tardy and confused and equivocal. He goes around the world apologizing for the United States of America. This is the greatest nation in the world. We don't have to go around and apologize for our country.
That's right.
The same as tyrants and thugs and bullies and autocrats and the like. We do not share his view that we're just one of equals morally or otherwise around the world. And then also, we need to make sure that we indicate to our would-be enemies or people who may test the strength of our relationship with key allies that there is no daylight between places like us and Israel. Otherwise, it invites danger. And in the wake of the Egyptian crisis, President Obama, first of all, couldn't be found in terms of his comments in the early days and weeks of the event. But his vice president comes out and assures the nation that President Mubarak is, quote-unquote, not a dictator. And Joe Biden, Secretary of State, comes out and says, the situation in Egypt is stable. And then she adds, and by the way, the Mubaraks and the Clintons are dinner friends, or something to that effect. You know, how is that helpful? And then they have the head of the National Intelligence Service go before Congress and testify that the Muslim Brotherhood is a quote-unquote largely secular organization. No, it's not. Then they have Gibbs, the former spokesperson for the White House, go to the podium and say, Mubarak must go. And we mean yesterday. And then they send a diplomat to whisper to certain go-betweens with Egypt saying, just kidding, we didn't mean it, he can stay a while. The president can't be found. When you have unfolding events and uncertainty, it's important that we articulate our principles of clarity and certainty. Our compass headings need to be set. We are a nation that values and prizes democracy. We're a nation that values and prizes human rights. We're a nation that values and prizes free and fair elections. We're a nation that prizes free and fair flow of information. And amongst one of many examples, when President Mubarak stole the 2010 parliamentary elections, much to the chagrin, disappointment, and heartache of the Egyptian people, at the very least, America should have spoke to the importance of freedom and democracy in those elections, and to have it be done in a fair manner. When the people of Iran in 2009 were holding up signs in English, when they were trying to start a revolution in that awful country under that awful regime, they were holding up signs, where does the United States stand? And President Obama stood silent. It was a terrible moment for our country, and a tremendous disservice to the office of President of the United States. I want to just close by telling you that if we went around this room, everybody would have their American story. And I'm sure we'd be inspired to listen to each one of them. But this is a nation where people can have their dreams because they're free. In my case, I grew up in a meatpacking town. My dad was a truck driver for much of his life. My mom was a homemaker. She died when I was 16 years old. My dad lost his job not too long after that, and we lived in this meatpacking town. If you can remember in the 1960s what a large, thousands and thousands of people working at a meatpacking plant would have looked like in terms of the sights and sounds and smells of that. That was my hometown. It was really hinged on that industry, and of course it shut down, not unlike the mills in New Hampshire and all of the dislocation that came with that. And so at an early age I saw the face of people who had lost jobs, very disruptive to my community, to moms and dads and families all throughout my community. When my mom was near passing, she called my brothers and sisters to her bedside in the hospital. And she looked them in the eye and she said, I want at least one of my kids to be able to go to college, and you guys are too old, but I wanted you to promise, look me in the eye, and promise that you'll do what you can to help Tim get to school and if you can get him to college. And I was able to live my American dream because in those moments I leaned in my faith. I learned some things about hard work, individual responsibility, the love of family, the love of people who come around and help, and a gesture of kindness and love and support. I learned the importance of hard work and education, the importance of having a loving mom and dad, and the values and perspectives that brings to you in your life, and much more. But these values and principles, again, are not a mystery. They're not complex. We know what made this nation great. We know it can be great again. It won't be easy, but it never is easy. If security were easy, everybody around the world would be secure. And if prosperity were easy, everybody around the world would be prosperous. And if freedom were easy, everybody around the world would be free. But they're not. It takes extraordinary commitment. It takes patriotism. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes people like you showing up in meetings like this to say it matters. I'll put some of my time and energy and talent into this process to make sure we get people who understand these values and will stand and fight and defend them. Now we need to make sure that we do the work. But remember, this is the United States of America. We are the American people. The founders envisioned it. Ronald Reagan personified it. Lincoln stood courageously to defend it. And this nation under God will be given a new birth of freedom. And we shall not perish from the earth. And everybody in this room is going to make sure that we do everything we can to restore America's promise. And it's going to start by getting a new president in 2012. Questions, and then he's going to make some announcements, and the meeting's going to be over. So if anybody has any questions, I'd love to hear them. Yes?
It seems like the fight over cutting the budget last week didn't go the way we all hoped it would go. Next week, fight is going to be raised the debt ceiling. Should we raise the debt ceiling? Yes or no?
Jennifer is asking whether we should raise the debt ceiling. The answer is no. That is really expensive. I'll tell you, President Obama has set up a false choice. He has said either raise the debt ceiling or the United States of America will default on its bills to outside creditors, which would set off a series of negative events. But what he doesn't tell you is that he, as the executive in chief for this nation, and the Congress, if they passed a law and he signed it, could direct the Treasury of the United States to pay our bills in priority order, starting with these outside debt and obligations so that default can be avoided. And then you can order the military to be paid next and then down the line until you get to lower priority things. What that would do is this. Would that allow you to have enough money to pay all the bills forever? No. But it would avoid the default for an extended period of time and allow a period of time to be available for the Congress and the President to do the real work, the courageous work that needs to be done to reform and transform and restructure our government. They all say, we're going to make the tough decisions, and they flap their jaws about how someday they're going to make the tough decisions. They never do unless we put their backs up against the wall. As governor, one of the things I learned is politicians, many of them are courageous and wonderful, but many of them also are like water running downhill. They flow to the point of least resistance, and it helps to put up some points of resistance. And so in my case, I set a record for vetoes in my state. I am a single-season veto record holder in the state of Minnesota. I had the first government shutdown in 150 years in my state over these kinds of issues. I also unallotted, using executive power, more money out of the state's budget than I believe all of the other governors in the history of my state combined. Jennifer was kind enough to mention the spending, which we cut in Minnesota. We cut taxes. We did first in the nation state for performance pay for teachers, tort reform, welfare reform, market-based, not government-based health care reforms, public employee pension reform. We had the third or fourth longest transit strike in the history of the country because our bus drivers thought they should work just 15 years and then have the government pay for their health insurance for the rest of their life. So I had all the protesters, before it was cool to reform public employee benefits. I did it in 2005, and we had the people stand outside my window with the sign during the transit strike, Pawlenty is a weapon of mass transit destruction. I share all that with you because it can be done. And if I can do it in the land of Al Franken, we can do it anywhere. We can do it anywhere. I hope and pray that our members of Congress do not raise the debt ceiling, that they use that as one of these dramatic moments and get the real work done. Yes, sir.
Governor,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
The reason Barack Obama is in office, one of the major reasons, is the media. The media malice. That's actually a movement. I suggest you watch it. How is anyone, other than Barack Obama, yourself, to beat the media? So how are you going to take that propaganda arm away from it?
Well, there's a number of things I learned. Everybody's going to say, I'm the candidate who can appeal to independence or do well in a swing state or whatever. I actually did it. So I got elected as a conservative and re-elected as a conservative in one of the bluest, if not the bluest, states in the country. And, the media always loved me? No. I don't ask for it to be positive. I just ask for it to be accurate and fair. And so it is what it is. It is what it is. But there's a knowledge that you have to have about issues, but then you also have to be able to communicate it. And you have to communicate it in ways that the people who aren't yet on our team feel like they're going to want to join our team, not by acting like Democrats, but by convincing them what we stand for is good. And I've done that. There's a Yankees hat in here.
I'm used to it. As Governor, the question I have, if you were occupying the oath of office, would you have called for military action in Libya?
In fact, on March 7th, I was the first 2012 potential candidate or national figure to say, establish the no-fly zone now, right now. And the reason was this. On March 7th, when I called for that, the rebels had taken over geographically the country, most of it. They had the momentum. They had Gaddafi on the ropes. And I think the threat of a no, and he was openly talking at the time about leaving voluntarily. At least those were the news reports. And I think if you would have threatened the no-fly zone decisively, quickly, and boldly, you would have pushed them out without much fanfare and without much problem quickly. Unfortunately, that is not what happened. Instead, the president dithered for 3 or more weeks, and worse yet, or as bad, he subordinated the interests and decision-making and decision-making options of the security interests of the United States of America to the United Nations and the Arab League. And here's his other problem, amongst many others. He's the leader of the free world. He's the President of the United States, and he says Gaddafi must go. When the President of the United States says Gaddafi must go, then Gaddafi must go. Unfortunately, because he has subordinated our interests and his decision-making to that UN resolution, he doesn't have now, in his mind, the tools available that would allow and force Gaddafi to go quickly and immediately. If you wanted Gaddafi to go, you can make him go pretty quickly. This is not Afghanistan. It's a relatively flat country, geographically, topographically. But he is in an untenable position because now Gaddafi sits. If he's there for weeks or months and you see more and more of what's going on happening, he has put the presidency, the office of the presidency, in an untenable position. He's put the United States of America, relative to these UN resolution, in a preposterous position. We should decide for ourselves what is in the best interest of the United States. And then, if we can get others to join us, great. But we should never subordinate our interests to an international organization, particularly the United States. Sarkozy leading the world on security issues, you know we've entered a new era of American foreign policy.
Question back here, Governor.
Yeah, go ahead.
On the size of the military, should it grow bigger, smaller, stay the same, and why?
Sure.
Whatever.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Short answer is I don't believe we should cut the military budget for this reason. I've been to Iraq 5 times. I've been to Afghanistan 3 times. I've been to visit troops all over the world, and I've been to Kuwait and Israel and Jordan and Turkey and Kosovo and Croatia and Europe and Asia and South America. And I share all that with you not to be immodest, but to tell you I've had a chance to see firsthand America's presence around the world in a variety of circumstances. And you cannot flip a switch on these military systems and this capacity quickly. As you know, the ability to respond depends on years, sometimes decades worth of development and commitment and diligence building up to that. You can't believe what I believe about the role of the United States in our protecting our security as a first priority, and then say we're going to cut the military. Now, can they be more efficient? Yes. Is there some savings we can find in the Department of Defense? Yes. But when we find that, we should redeploy it back into the military. By the way, on that pie chart of federal spending, if you look at the growth of the military part of it, while it's noteworthy, it is not where the main problem is. The main problem is in the red part I described, which is the entitlement. But we need to, the first order of business of the United States federal government is to make sure we do everything we can to make sure our country is safe and secure. I want our military to be the unquestioned leader in the world militarily by far, because I don't want anybody to think they can mess with us or that we're vulnerable in any way. I want to maintain such a distance in that regard that nobody dare challenge us.
What's the solution to the illegal immigration problem?
Question related to illegal immigration and the solution. I'll try to tell you that we're a country that has benefited from immigration, but it needs to be legal, and it needs to be reasonable, and it needs to be orderly. And we're a nation based on the rule of law. And if you have lots of people ignoring and violating the law, you undermine one of the central foundations of our country. You can't have large numbers of people just saying, well, the law doesn't matter, or, we'll look the other way, and kick it down the road. So what do we do? Number one, from a security and an immigration standpoint, it's important that we enforce the borders. And we don't do that very well now. I was one of the few governors in the country that volunteered to send National Guard troops to Arizona, my National Guard troops, our Minnesota's, to participate in Operation Jumpstart. And it worked, and the illegal immigration crossings during that time went down. I spent some time in Arizona just a few days ago with the border sheriff there, and he gave me a lot of good advice about how to effectively reinforce the border. That's number one. Number two, why do most immigrants come here? They want a job, right? So what's the current system? If I go to Cliff and say, Cliff, I'd like a job, Cliff gets out an I-9 form. I get out some documents. Cliff, there might be a passport or a birth certificate or the like. By the way, I don't question President Obama's authenticity of the birth certificate, but I do question what planet he's from when we look at the policies. Scenario with Cliff. I want a job with Cliff. He gets out the I-9. I get out some documents. He checks that I gave him a birth certificate or a passport. He staples it, copies it, staples it to the back of the I-9, throws it in the file. Cliff has met his obligation as employer. I've seemingly met my obligation as an applicant. And unless somebody checks it, we all go about our business. What do we know about that system? It's filled with fraud in many cases. You can't expect Cliff, if he's the local hardware store owner, to conduct an international investigation about the authenticity of those documents. That would be unfair and burdensome to him. We can't have a 1940s paper system in the year 2011, so we have to have a system that allows employers to quickly, accurately, and efficiently verify the person who's applying for the job, who is who he or she says they are, whether they're here legally, and whether they're eligible to have a job. And we have a system called E-Verify. It's not perfect, but it needs to be better and more accurate. But I issued an executive order when I was governor of Minnesota that said if you want to be an employee in the state of Minnesota, you got to go through E-Verify. If you're a contractor, you do business with the state of Minnesota, or a subcontractor, you got to use E-Verify. And then lastly, we also should be in favor of smart legal immigration. So if you go to universities, for example, and you go to hire a PhD or master's classes in the science, and you see who's in these engineering, chemistry classes and the like, they don't look like me. We need smart people from around the world who want to come and study in the United States, and if they have that kind of talent and skill and ability and are able to be here and meet our legal requirements, we welcome them to our country, I think. And so I think we should be in favor of smart, strategic, legal immigration, but be strict and tough when it comes to enforcing against illegal immigration.
What about the illegals that are here now?
The illegals are here now. There's estimates that there's about 9 to 14 million, depending on whose numbers that you look. I do not favor amnesty or some sort of line budging towards a pathway to citizenship. Well, I don't think you can do anything until you do these other things because people have lost confidence in the debate. So secure the borders first, get a real employment verification system, one that works and isn't burdensome on employers and accurate and fair. But as to the 9 or 14, I'm not in favor of giving them some sort of preferential pathway towards citizenship. As to the people who are here, I think you treat the drug dealer or runner who's in Denver 6 months, who's running meth up to Denver, differently than you do the grandma who's been here 30 years and has had a son or daughter who's fought in the military. Again, not citizenship, but I don't think those two are. If this grandma's been working 20 years and been law-abiding and has got people, son or daughter who served in the military, that's somewhat of a different, I think, approach than the person who's running drugs and's been here 6 months. So I think we have to give it some thought to that, but I don't have a specific proposal about how to do it tonight. All right, maybe we do a few more and then we'll
You worked for the McCain campaign, I understand. What would you do differently with what you know now in hindsight?
Win. Well, in fairness to Senator McCain, once the economy tanked in this fall of 2008, it was going to be very difficult for somebody other than difficult for a Republican to win. So he found himself in a circumstance that was very difficult to navigate. And other people want to pick on other aspects of the campaign, but I think that the economy had a lot to do with it, not all of it, not a lot to do with it.
Question back here, Governor.
I'm sorry?
Question back here.
Yeah.
Governor, I've seen too many good Republican candidates hamstrung and handicapped by the primary process, that is Republicans shooting each other in the back. Will you pledge to observe, as Ronald Reagan said it, the 11th commandment for Republicans, and insist that every other candidate, and we have a lot of good qualified candidates, does the same? Because otherwise, if we keep shooting ourselves in the foot, we're going to be saying, Barack Obama, how did it happen?
That's really good advice, and another great piece of wisdom from Ronald Reagan. All of us, I believe I'm going to be the nominee. We've got a long road ahead of us yet, and I'm just starting to get known even here, but much less around the rest of the country. But there's a lot of momentum on our team, and we'll hope you'll consider joining us. Maybe we'll just wrap up with this so you can get on with your evening. But whoever the nominee is, and I believe and hope it'll be me, we're going to have to be a team at the end. And so we're all going to have to rally around whoever that nominee is. And it's not going to have done us any good if for the previous 6 or 8 months or a year we did what you just described. So I'm going to do my very best to make sure I promote the things that are my strengths and what I stand for and what my record is without criticizing the other Republicans in the field. Now there'll be some issue differences, so I think that's fair to point out in a respectful way, policy differences. But in terms of other attacks or personal attacks, we don't need it, it's not appropriate, and we're all on the same team. And we need to make sure we have that spirit so we can unite at the end.